This is Howard Robart Hughes, Jr. From the 60s to the 1980s, he was the richest person in America, beating out oil magnates H.L. Hunt and J. Paul Getty. He was considered a business genius, at one time owning RKO Pictures, TWA Airlines, and numerous Las Vegas hotels and casinos. He was diagnosed with extreme obsessive-compulsive disorder, along with other mental conditions. As he advanced in age, his mental health deteriorated. He would sometimes go into seclusion, unable to function for months. Then suddenly he would recover and start issuing orders to his subordinates, making shrewd business decisions. Howard Hughes, Jr. was born in Humble, Texas, just outside of Houston, to Howard Hughes Sr. and Arlena Gano Hughes on December the 24th, 1905. He was an only child. By the time Howard Jr. was 4 years old, his dad had become a wealthy man by holding a patent on a much improved oil well drilling bit that he helped to invent. Now this is Howard at the age of 7. It's believed that he may have inherited his obsession with germs from his mother, Alina, a Dallas debutante. She was so concerned about germs, she would constantly check Howard every day for diseases and watching everything that he ate, having him sleep in her room until he was 10 years old, trying to protect him from germs. She was described as a beautiful, charismatic kook. As an adolescent, Howard became paralyzed for several months and unable to walk. Doctors couldn't find any reason and felt that it was mental. After a few months, he fully recovered on his own. However, he became hard of hearing that will plague him all of his life. At a young age, Howard showed interest in science and technology. Here he is in South Bend Junior High in Houston. Howard is on the left. He was drawn to engineering at the age of 11. He built the first wireless transmitter in Houston. And in 1917, at the age of 12, he got this picture in the local paper for building the first motorized bicycle in the city, when his mother had refused to let him have a motorcycle. During his teenage years, his family was living in this house at 3921 Yoakum Boulevard in Houston. At age 16, Howard was attending high school at the Thatcher School, an elite boarding school in California. He never finished high school, but was able to attend college courses at Caltech because Howard Sr. made a large contribution to the school. On March the 29th, 1922, Howard Hughes lost his mother, Alina, at the age of 38 from complications of ectopic pregnancy. She's buried in the Hughes family plot at the Greenwood Cemetery in Houston. After his mother's death, 16-year-old Howard returned to Houston and enrolled at the Rice Institute of Technology. 2 years after his mother's death, on the 14th of January 1924, Howard Sr. passed away from a severe heart attack. He was in his office on the 5th floor of the Humboldt Oil Building in Houston. 18-year-old Howard Jr. inherited $1 million plus control of the Hughes Tool Company, worth millions. Howard quickly dropped out of school at the Rice Institute, but a year later, on June 1, 1925, he married Ella Botts Rice. Ella was the grandniece of William Marsh Rice, from whom the Rice University was named. The next year, in 1926, Howard and Ella moved to Hollywood. He wanted to try producing pictures. He picked a family friend to run Hughes Tool Company, leaving him free to concentrate on making movies. The couple moved into the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. He started his film career with his first movie, Swell Hogan, which was so terrible it never even made it to the theaters. It was Hughes's custom each time they would start a new profession, He would lock himself into a room and study, learning everything he could, taking 20 days. Not 10, not 15, but always 20. His next movie was a silent film entitled Two Arabian Nights, about two Americans captured by German soldiers during World War I, and one's attempt to escape a POW camp. It starred William Boyd and Mary Astor. This film won the Academy Award, Howard Hughes producer. His next film started out as a silent picture, Hell's Angels, about two British flyers that battled German pilots during World War I. After 1.5 years, the film was still not finished. Hughes decided to remake it as a talkie. The original female lead was a Norwegian-American, Greta Nielsen, who had to be replaced due to her heavy accent. Howard brought in 18-year-old newcomer Jean Harlow to replace her. Hughes, who was involved in aviation and loved flying, was determined to make the battle scene realistic by hiring over 70 stunt pilots. At one point, the pilots refused to do one of the flying sequences, stating that it was just too dangerous. Hughes, determined to get the shot, flew the scene himself, wanting to show off his flying skills. He got the shot, but he crashed the plane. He got a fractured skull and had to undergo surgery. Others were not so lucky. C.K. Phillips was killed while piloting a British fighter on way to shooting locations. Al Johnson ran into tension wires as he landed a plane and was severely burned. He died the next day. Pilot Ruford McAllister died without explanation. Phil Jones was killed during filming a scene while a bomber was supposed to crash. He was operating a smoke generator at the time. In early 1929, Hughes seen silent film star Billy Dove on the Starlight dance floor of the Baltimore Hotel in Hollywood. He began having her followed. She said even though she was married to director Irvin Willett, if she went somewhere, Hughes would just show up. He pursued her constantly, and they began a 3-year affair. When her husband found out about it, he demanded $350,000 from Hughes to divorce Dove. Dove said Hughes paid it. She also said that they once made a trip to Czechoslovakia to see a doctor about his hearing, but it didn't help. She left the affair in 1932 without ever explaining why. Also in 1929, Howard's wife Ella decided to leave and go back to Houston, where she filed for divorce. Hughes settled with her for $1.25 million. In 1933, Ella married again and had a son. Ella Rice passed away on the 23rd of June, 1992. She's buried at the Glenwood Cemetery in Houston. Ella was 87 years old. 3 years after his divorce from Ella, in 1932, Hughes will direct and produce, along with Howard Hawks, Scarface, that starred Paul Muni, and the film made a star out of George Raft. It was loosely based on the Chicago gangster Al Capone. That same year, Hughes established the Hughes Aircraft Company. He will eventually design and fly his own planes. Along with making movies, on September the 12th, 1935, Howard, in a plane of his own design, established the world's land speed record at 352.46 miles per hour. This is 30-year-old Howard Hughes being booked on the night of 11 July 1936 for negligent homicide. He was driving a vehicle that struck and killed pedestrian Gabriel S. Meyer, who was standing in a safe zone waiting for a streetcar at the corner of 3rd and Lorraine in Los Angeles. A witness stated that Hughes was driving erratic and speeding. Doctors stated that Hughes was intoxicated at the time of the incident. He was cleared of all charges when the main witness changed his statement and said that Mr. Myers stepped in front of the vehicle. His statement was backed up by Nancy Bailey, who was a passenger in the Hughes car. While flying a Lockheed 14 Super Electra in July of 1938, Howard broke a world record by flying around the world in 91 hours and 14 minutes.
Just because I've been terribly worried that I wouldn't get out of here before the weather changed. I had a good break in the weather yesterday, and I've lost that, and I suppose it'll be fair today, but I've been in an awful rush to get away from here, and I hope you'll forgive me.
Oh, you bet.
He was given a ticker tape parade in New York City. By this time, Howard had met actress Katharine Hepburn and was involved in an 18-month romance. He bought her a ring and they had planned to marry. When Katharine realized he was secretly seeing other women, she backed out and went back east to her parents' home. In 1939, Howard ordered his executive, Noah Dietrich, who ran the Hughes Aircraft and Hughes Tool Company, to start buying shares in TWA Airlines, finally ending up with controlling interest. In 1943, Hughes was involved in a second aircraft crash over Lake Mead, Nevada. He was test flying his Sikorsky S-45 amphibious aircraft for the war effort. He was flying from L.A. to Vegas, carrying 2 aviation inspectors and 2 of his employees, plus actress Ava Gardner. He dropped his new girlfriend, who had just divorced from Mickey Rooney, off in Los Angeles and continued to Lake Mead to finish the qualifying test. The S-43 crashed, killing Inspector C.O. Klein and employee Richard Felt. Hughes had to be rescued by one of the others on board after a gash to his head and being knocked unconscious. At the same time, Hughes was also working on the H-4 Hercules Spruce Goose. He received a contract from the government to produce a plane that could carry large payloads across the Atlantic, as German U-boats was sinking so many transport ships. However, according to Ava Gardner, Howard was trying to do so much that his mental health began to deteriorate. He would sometimes repeat the same sentence as much as 33 times. He would wash his hands until they were raw. Howard was extremely possessive of all his girlfriends and having them followed and investigated. He would have them kept in apartments where they could be watched. But Ava Gardner was one exception. Their relationship will continue for 10 years on and off until she refused to go with his chauffeur to pick him up at the airport. He ended up dislocating her jaw, and she knocked him out with a heavy metal ashtray. It ended their affair. It'll do it every time. The same time this was all going on, Howard was in the process of making a major motion picture, The Outlaw, that starred 19-year-old Jane Russell. Hughes literally pulled her out of a stack of photographs, impressed with her physical appearance. However, according to Noah Dietrich, he liked and respected her, but no romance. Russell said that Howard once tried to bed her after a party. She turned him down and he promised to never do it again. He was determined to make her a sex star, so much so that the censors had several scenes cut out of the movie. Howard was so disgusted with the censors, he said, "I'll never direct another movie, only produce." The Outlaw was a Western filmed in Arizona, and in order to get enough horses, Hughes had to buy them from a ranch in Oklahoma. The ranch foreman was Ben Johnson Sr., who had to send a wrangler along with the horses to see that they got to Arizona by rail. His son, Ben Jr., asked if he could go wrangle the horses. After the movie finished filming, Hughes, who also loved horses, asked Ben Johnson if he would take the herd on to California for him. Ben wrote his dad saying, "Dad, I'm going to stay out here. They pay better than you do. Of course, Ben Johnson later became a Western movie star. On July the 7th, 1946, Howard Hughes was flying an experimental spy plane, the XF-11, for the United States Army, that his company had built. It's believed that a hydraulic oil leak occurred and the plane began losing altitude. He tried to land in a golf course, but couldn't make it. His plane struck 3 houses in the Beverly Hills neighborhood. The paper stated that Hughes was pulled from the exploding plane by a Marine sergeant who was first on the scene. This is Howard in the ambulance on his way to the hospital, fighting for his life. He had broken ribs, collarbone, and lungs punctured in 6 places, plus burns to his hands and body. Not expected to live. However, again he beat the odds. But this time he will suffer from pain the rest of his life. He will become dependent on painkillers. His compulsive disorder will increase. However, he'll be able to pull himself together enough to testify before a Senate committee investigating Hughes for mishandling government contracts.
$40 million has been paid by the government to the Hughes Aviation Company, and nothing has been thus far received. What became of the $40 million is what we want to know.
So I ask you this question again, Senator Brewster. During my last trip to Washington, and while we were having lunch in your suite at the Mayflower Hotel, did you or did you not offer to call off this entire investigation if I would agree to merge TWA Trans World Airline with your friend Juan Tripp's Pan American Airways?
He had been given millions to build a huge amphibious plane to carry 700 troops or a large amount of equipment. They claimed he wasted millions on a plane that he knew would never fly. 3 months later, after testifying on November the 2nd, Howard Hughes was taking the H-4 Hercules, nicknamed the Spruce Goose, for a trial run.
I put the sweat of my life into this thing. I have my reputation rolled up in it. And I have stated several times that if it's a failure, I'll probably leave this country and never come back, and I mean it.
With newsmen and federal inspectors aboard, the Goose was only supposed to taxi along the Long Beach shore. But on the spur of the moment, Hughes raised the H-4 to a height of 70 feet for over a mile, then setting it back down, proving it could fly. After the historic flight, Howard will never fly the Goose again. It'll be kept out of the public eye for the next 33 years. He will have a complete crew to maintain the plane's condition. It was stored in a climate-controlled hangar, costing $1 million per year. Around 1948, Howard gave Noah Dinklage orders to purchase controlling interest in the struggling RKO studios. He shut down the studios for 6 months, looking for communist sympathizers, eventually firing 3/4 of the staff. He had seen Betty Jane Greer modeling in the June 8, 1942 issue of Life magazine. He called her to Hollywood and signed her to a personal contract, but he didn't let her act. Jane Greer would become private property of Howard at the age of 18. She said that she had heard of his compulsive disorder, but realized how uncontrolled it was at a restaurant when he left the table to go to the bathroom. When he returned, his shirt was soaking wet. When she asked why, he said he had to take it off and wash it because it had a chocolate spot on it. To try and get out from his control, she married Rudy Valley. Hughes was outraged, and the marriage failed 6 months later. She moved in with Howard, but he was demanding. He told her he would ruin her career if she ever left him. She married Edward Lasker, a businessman, and escaped him. In 1949, it was reported that Hughes became infatuated with teenager Elizabeth Taylor, and actually offered Taylor's mother $1 million if she would allow him to marry her daughter. They laughed at the offer. Hughes had started dating Ida Lupina when she was only a teenager. Some 20 years later, when she was trying to become the only female director, Howard remembered his former girlfriend and assigned her production company to a contract with RKO to help her. Also in 1949, according to actress Terry Moore, she and Howard began a romance when she was 20 and he was in his 40s. According to Terry, they were married on a yacht in international waters. Unfortunately, the ship's logs and records were lost. Although she couldn't prove the marriage, the Hughes family gave her an undetermined amount of money after Howard's death. Terry said that he married her because she refused to sleep with him outside of wedlock. The next year, in 1950, Hughes spotted a picture of Italian beauty, 23-year-old Gina Lollobrigida. He had his representative offer 2 plane tickets for her and her husband, but only one ticket was sent. When she arrived in Los Angeles, believing that it would be the beginning of her Hollywood career, she was placed in a hotel with security guards outside the door, not allowed to leave the room except with him, and couldn't make any phone calls. He tried to persuade her to leave her husband and marry him. After a month and a half, she demanded a plane ticket home. He agreed, provided that she signed a contract never to work in the United States for anyone but him. She signed and went home. After his near-fatal plane crash in 1946, Howard became more and more addicted to painkillers and drugs. He became fanatical about germs, so much so that he had his 1954 New Yorker equipped with an aircraft-grade filtration system, and he would never shake hands with anyone. In 1957, Howard married for the second time. He had become interested in actress Jean Peters. It was speculated that there was talk of having him committed, and he married so no one could commit him but his wife. He flew Jean and aides to Nevada. Howard planned every detail. They were married in a local motel. Everyone had to wear duck hunting clothes. They'll remain married for 13 years until 1971. She will live in a mansion near Beverly Hills, guarded by security and rarely seeing her husband. They communicated mostly by phone. After Hughes moved into the Desert Inn in Vegas, she would sometimes make a trip to see him. Investigators would follow her everywhere and report back to Hughes if she even spoke to someone. By 1971, when she divorced him, he was so far off the rails that it was doubtful if he even knew. He gave her a lucrative settlement, or at least his representatives did. After the divorce, she will quit pictures and give up public life. She'll marry Stanley Hogue, an executive at the 20th Century Fox. On October the 13th, 2000, Jean Peters will pass away from leukemia at the age of 73. She's buried at the Holy Cross Cemetery in Culver City. The next year that they married, in 1957, Hughes got out of the motion picture business. He gave up his position as chairman of RKO. For years, the center of Howard Hughes' empire was located at 7000 West Romaine Street. Security was so tight, Noah Dietrich, who ran several multi-million-dollar companies for Howard, had to stand on the street and someone would drop a fishing line out of a second-story window with his check attached. That's how he got paid. In December 1957, Hughes decided that he wanted to screen some movies. He locked himself in a darkened screening room and didn't come out for 4 months, eating only chocolate bars and drinking milk. He urinated in empty bottles and placed them all in a row. He sat naked in a chair. He watched the same movies over and over. The Conqueror had been filmed the year before in 1956. It starred John Wayne and Susan Hayward. Hughes hated the film so much that he spent $12 million to buy up every copy of the movie, so no one would ever see it. When Howard finally emerged from the screening room, he was a physical and mental wreck. He ordered that no one look at him or speak to him unless he asked the question. He moved into the Beverly Hills Hotel and rented bungalows for himself and others. There he soon began acting as he did in the screening room. During 1958, Hughes dismissed longtime right-hand man Noel Dietrich. In his place, he hired Robert Mayhew, ex-FBI with contacts at the CIA. At first, his main job was to keep an eye on his wife, Jean Peters, and others. Robert will become close confidant of Howard, but he will never meet him face to face. They communicated by memo and telephone. This is a 1961 picture of Howard Hughes, 15 years before his death. It's believed to be the last picture ever taken of Hughes. In 1966, Howard arrived in Las Vegas by private train. He rented an entire 9th floor of the Desert Inn, plus the 8th floor for his headquarters operation. Within a year, the hotel asked Hughes's party to move. They needed the extra rooms for high rollers, as Hughes and the staff did not gamble. Not wanting to leave his seclusion, he bought the Desert Inn. He never did anything himself. He only issued orders for others to carry out. One such order was to buy the Silver Slipper Casino. The sign advertising the Slipper was shining into his dark room, so he asked the management to turn it off. They refused. So he bought the Silver Slipper. And when he learned that the sign was making money for the casino, he left it on. Hughes then began a buying spree. It may have been his compulsive disorder that started it. But he ended up buying the Frontier, the Sands, the Castaway, plus Harold's Club in Reno, a radio station, and thousands of acres outside Vegas. By 1971, Howard was in such bad shape, he told Robert Mayhew, "The reason I don't want you to see me is if you seen what I look like, you wouldn't follow my orders." He sat in his darkened room, naked. The only time his doctors could check him was when he was asleep or passed out with drugs. No one was allowed in his room. When Mayhew didn't hear from him for a long time, they would check on him to see if he is still alive. His 3 doctors who were on staff to take care of him found his hemoglobin had fallen to 4, that he was anemic, malnutritioned, with a weak heart, and pneumonia. On November the 4th and 5th, 1971, they gave him a blood transfusion. Doctors advised that he be taken to the hospital. Afraid he would be found incompetent, he issues orders to leave Las Vegas. He was carried down the fire escape on a stretcher with his head covered at the Desert Inn, put on a private jet at Nellis Air Force Base, and flown to Paradise Island in the Bahamas. Howard had been paying rent for the 9th floor of one of the hotels for over a year. For the next 5 years, he'll move from hotel to hotel. In 1968, a Russian nuclear sub sank close to Hawaii. But in 1972, the CIA contacted the Hughes organization to help in a secret plot to raise the Russian sub without Russia knowing about it. The government paid the Hughes Corporation to build a ship to raise the sub using the cover story that Hughes' ship was to mine magnesium in the sea. It worked and part of the sub was raised. By early February in 1976, the Hughes entourage was living in the penthouse at the Princess Hotel in Acapulco, Mexico, where he stayed in the dark, sitting naked, not washing, relieving himself in bottles. By this time, Howard Hughes had become emaciated and deranged, unable to communicate from his physical condition and long use of codeine, a weaker form of morphine. His 6'4" frame weighed only 90 pounds. His hair and beard were extremely long and unkempt. His fingernails and toenails had grown so long they curled. He also had bed sores. On the morning of April the 5th, 1976, Mexican doctors were called to the Princess Hotel. They was told by Hughes' staff doctors that Howard had gone into a coma from convulsions 3 days before on April the 2nd. They thought it might be a brain hemorrhage. A decision was made to fly him to the Methodist Hospital in Houston. He was placed on a private plane headed for Texas. At 1:27 p.m., the doctors pronounced him deceased somewhere between Acapulco and Houston. During the autopsy, doctors discovered 5 hypodermic needles broken off still in him. Doctors stated his cause of death was most likely kidney failure. Howard Robart Hughes, Jr. is buried in the family plot with his parents in the Greenwood Cemetery in Houston, Texas. He was 70 years old.